Here's the truth that most people would not guess. The real wealth in America doesn't reside in New York. It's not in Silicon Valley. And it's definitely not some offshore in some island that most of us can't even pronounce. It's quietly sitting in plain sight, right here in our backyard. Think about this. South Dakota, Nevada, Alaska, Delaware, Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire. 7 states that, if you've never heard of them in this context, might as well be some secret countries. But because of the ultra-wealthy, they are the new Switzerland, the hidden havens where fortunes are not just stored, but protected from generations, sometimes for centuries. And here's the thing. Most Americans have no idea this game even exists. Yet the families playing in it are building structures designed to outlive us all. Entire dynasties preserved quietly, legally, and with astonishing efficiency. This week we're going down a rabbit hole. I've literally spent hours digging through these laws, court filings, public records, and trust structures. I've pieced together how these states became magnets for generational wealth and why the richest families in this country are using them to shield billions in ways the rest of us cannot even imagine. So sit tight and buckle your seatbelt because we're going for a ride. This is the inside story of America's dynasty trust havens, the hidden architecture of generational wealth. And by the end of this episode, you'll see the financial game the 1% are playing and why most of us are not even pieces on the same board. But before we dive into these mechanics, let's take a step back. When most people think about ultra-wealthy protecting their money, they imagine exotic offshore accounts, Swiss bank accounts, Cayman Islands, the usual suspects. But that's only half the story, because the real fortress for multi-generational wealth is right here in the United States. That's right, 7 states. South Dakota, Alaska, Nevada, Delaware, Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire. These states quietly rewrote their laws to make themselves irresistible to the richest families in this country. And it worked. These are not just tax breaks or minor loopholes. They are sophisticated legal structures that allow money to grow, move, and survive for centuries, shielding them from the usual threats like estate taxes, lawsuits, creditors, and even family disputes. You know what the crazy part is? Most Americans have no idea this game exists. Meanwhile, families like the Pritzkers, the Whartons, the Gettys, and even some foreign billionaires are using these states as financial fortresses. Generational wealth is not just preserved here, it's engineered. And that's what we are unpacking today. I'll walk you through each state, the strategies they offer, how the 1% leverage them, and why it is essentially a completely different game from what the average family plays. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand this is not about rich people being lucky. It's about systems built to outlast time itself. And it's a game most of us don't even know exists. Let's start with the heavyweight champion of dynasty trust. I'm talking about South Dakota. Now, when I first heard that South Dakota, yes, the state famous for Mount Rushmore and the Badlands, was the epicenter of multi-generational wealth in America, to be honest, I laughed. I thought, there's no way. But the more I dug in, the more jaw-dropping the story became. Back in the early 1980s, South Dakota quietly made a decision that would reshape the financial landscape for the ultra-wealthy. They eliminated the rule against perpetuities. For those who don't know, that rule used to force trust to end after a certain number of years. South Dakota removed it entirely. So what does that mean? You could create a trust that lasts forever. A legal structure that could hold, grow, and pass wealth down indefinitely, not just for a generation or two, but for centuries. And that was just the start. Now, here's a couple of things that South Dakota had to layer into their whole new structure. No state income tax, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax, ironclad privacy laws, strong asset protections from creditors and lawsuits. It wasn't accidental. South Dakota built a fortress, a financial castle of sorts. And once word got out, families from all over the country started moving billions into these structures. Here's a concrete example you can lean on. The Pritzker family, for example. You know the Hyatt Hotels billionaires with family members in politics, such as the current governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and the former Secretary of Commerce under the Obama administration, Penny Pritzker. They have significant assets held in South Dakota trusts. And it's not just American families. Foreign billionaires looking for privacy, stability, and security also flock there. And this is not a rumor. It's been documented in the Pandora Papers and public filings. And this is what makes it fascinating. South Dakota doesn't advertise itself. There's no billboard or flashy campaign. The secrecy is in its selling point. Wealth moves quietly, legally, and invisibly. I remember reading about a trust structure in South Dakota that could allow assets to grow uninterrupted for centuries, with essentially zero tax erosion, protected from lawsuits, divorce settlements, or creditor claims. That's the kind of financial architecture that makes South Dakota a kingdom, and its trust companies the equivalent of financial vault keepers. This is where the 1% are not just preserving wealth. They are designing it to outlive entire generations, untouched by the normal risks that wipe out most fortunes by the third generation. And if you think this is hyperbolic, just wait. The systems these states built didn't just attract the ultra-wealthy. They forced other states to compete for their attention. Now, Nevada, Alaska, Delaware, they saw South Dakota pulling billions and said, oh, we want in. South Dakota didn't just win a title, it sparked an arms race. And that's where the story gets even intriguing. So, South Dakota set the stage. But as soon as word got out about what was possible, a trust that could last forever, shield assets, and offer near total privacy, other states started taking note. And here comes Nevada. Nevada looked at South Dakota and said, we can do that too, but better. They introduced 365-year trust, practically a century-long guarantee of financial immortality. They reinforced privacy protections, tightened asset shields against lawsuits and creditors, and added tax advantages. No income tax, no capital gains tax. Perfect win. For a wealthy family deciding where to park billions, Nevada suddenly became a compelling option. And it's not just theory. Nevada Trust has been widely used by real estate moguls, casino owners, and tech entrepreneurs who wanted a domestic haven with strong legal protections. It became a magnet for anyone who wanted benefits of South Dakota Trust, but with a slightly different flavor of protection and flexibility. Now, Alaska went even further. Alaska created a Domestic Asset Protection Trust, or DAPT, a structure so powerful that lawyers often described it as a financial equivalent of a bunker. If properly established, an Alaska DAPT can shield assets from creditors, business lawsuits, divorce claims, even some types of legal judgments. Alaska wasn't trying to outdo South Dakota in a flashy secrecy. They were just engineering legal defensibility. It was a calculated move. Make trust bulletproof, enticing families who wanted the ultimate protective fortress for their wealth. Some prominent families have utilized Alaska Trust to protect their wealth. Notably, the family of former Vice President Dan Quayle reportedly utilized Alaska Trust structures for long-term estate planning. It is a safe legal strategy, but it demonstrates just how serious families were about protecting multi-generational wealth domestically. What's fascinating is how the rivalry escalated. South Dakota was the first, basically the king. Nevada was a challenger, refining duration and privacy. Alaska brought the bunker-level asset protection. It was a three-way arms race in domestic wealth preservation. And as I traced the flows of money, I realized each state was competing for the attention of families who control billions, creating a system that legally and structurally most Americans couldn't even imagine. Think about this. Families like the Pritzkers, foreign billionaires, and casino tycoons, they were not just choosing a state at random. They were choosing which fortress would protect their dynasty better. And the stakes were not just millions, not just billions either, but legacy itself, the power to keep wealth intact for generations. By the time the states finalized their laws, South Dakota had inspired a blueprint, Nevada had pushed boundaries, and Alaska had perfected the vault. Today, they form the backbone of domestic dynasty trust havens, a network the average person likely doesn't even know exists. While South Dakota, Nevada, and Alaska were rewriting the rules and attracting new wealth, Delaware quietly reinforced its position as a stronghold of old money. Unlike South Dakota, Nevada, and Alaska, Delaware didn't need to reinvent itself. They already had three advantages going for them. It had centuries of corporate and trust law expertise, a court system designed to favor business interests, and a well-established financial ecosystem. For the East Coast dynasties, we are talking about families holding generational wealth. Delaware was the natural choice. Its trust laws offered long-term duration for trust, though not quite as extreme as South Dakota or Nevada. It also offered strong privacy protections, a highly predictable legal environment, and access to top-tier trust companies and legal experts. If you think of South Dakota as an audacious newcomer and Alaska as a high-security fortress, Delaware is a quiet general, consistent, reliable, and immensely powerful. Old money families like the Rockefellers, DuPonts, and Astors have long relied on Delaware trusts to protect their legacies. These trusts are not flashy. They are engineered for stability, predictability, and continuity. And there's a subtle power play here. While the newer states competed for flashy, headline-grabbing trust features, Delaware offered what most ultra-wealthy families value the most, which is trust law certainty. When billions are at stake, predictability beats novelty every time. So you start to see the landscape forming. South Dakota is audacious, limitless, high profile. Nevada is competitive, long duration, and flexible. Alaska is defensive, ultra protective, bulletproof. Delaware is steady, historical, and predictable. Each state carved out a niche, attracting different types of families, different generations of wealth, and different strategies for preservation. And when you layer them together, you realize the American domestic trust system isn't fragmented. It is an orchestrated network designed to serve the needs of dynasties across the country and across centuries. But the story doesn't end here. The newer entrants like Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire saw this ecosystem and asked themselves, why can't we compete? Why can't we build our own havens? And that's exactly what happened here. By the time South Dakota, Nevada, and Alaska and Delaware had solidified their positions, a few more states noticed a massive opportunity. If they could attract the ultra-wealthy, they could bring in billions in assets and legal activity and economic influence. And that's exactly what Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire did. These states were not content to watch the big players dominate. They studied the models, picked the best features, and adapted quickly. Wyoming became known for its combination of long-duration trust and anonymous LLCs. That anonymity, being legal, protected, and enforceable, made it attractive to families who wanted absolute discretion. In fact, members of the Wharton family, the heirs to the Walmart fortune, have long leveraged Wyoming's LLCs to consolidate and manage their holdings efficiently. Dynasty trusts were a natural extension of that strategy. Tennessee, on the other hand, offered flexible trust laws, strong asset protection, and no state income tax. It became appealing for Southern wealth seeking a stable, low-tax environment, especially for families wanting to keep wealth within regional networks. New Hampshire, meanwhile, focused on privacy, asset protection, and long-duration trusts while creating a trust-friendly regulatory environment. Although it is a smaller state compared to the others, it became a haven for families who valued discretion and legal predictability. These newer entrants were not just copying South Dakota or Nevada. They innovated. They found gaps, emphasized anonymity, and offered a boutique approach to trust administration that appealed to sophisticated families with complex assets. This resulted in a domestic web of wealth preservation that spans the entire country. In the Midwest and the West, you have South Dakota and Wyoming. In the South, you have Tennessee. In the Northeast, you have Delaware and New Hampshire. And Alaska is an ultra-defensive outlier. Every state's approach is different, meaning a wealthy family can diversify their dynastic strategy across multiple states, layering protections, privacy, and longevity in ways most Americans can't even imagine. This is how domestic dynasty trust havens became not just an alternative to offshore tax havens, but arguably a smarter, safer, and more permanent solution. And it all started with the 1% thinking centuries ahead. So now that we've mapped out the states, it's time to pull back the curtain and talk about the mechanics of these dynastic trusts and why they're so effective at preserving wealth for generations. Okay, now we get into the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of dynasty trusts. And don't worry, I'll make this simple enough to follow. But trust me, the power of these structures is staggering. Think of a dynasty trust as a legal container. You put assets in it. We're talking cash, stocks, real estate, businesses, and the trust owns them, not you. That separation is critical because it changes the rules of the game. Here's what makes them extraordinary. First, longevity. Unlike typical trusts, which expire after a set period or trigger estate taxes when passed down, dynasty trusts in states like South Dakota or Nevada can last for centuries, sometimes forever. Your great-great-great-grandchildren might never have to touch the principal to keep wealth intact. Secondly, asset protection. The assets inside the trust are shielded from creditors, lawsuits, divorce, and even some family disputes. That meant if a family business fails, a descendant gets sued, the trust remains secure. Then there's tax efficiency. Many dynasty trusts are structured to minimize or eliminate estate and inheritance taxes, and in some states, there is no state income tax or capital gains tax either. That's money that keeps compounding, generation after generation. We can't forget about control. Even though the trust owns the assets, the original family can dictate how wealth is distributed, invested, or used. Some trusts give beneficiaries limited access to protect them from themselves, ensuring that wealth isn't squandered. We definitely cannot forget about privacy. Trusts in these 7 states often operate behind sealed court records. That means the public doesn't see who owns what, which is crucial for families wanting discretion. Let me give you a quick example, purely illustrative but based on documented strategies. Imagine a wealthy family with $500 million in diversified assets. They place these in South Dakota Dynasty Trust. The trust lasts indefinitely, legally protecting them from lawsuits, divorce settlements, and creditor claims. Over decades, the assets compound, shielded from federal and state estate taxes. By the time it reaches their 3rd generation, the family could see hundreds of millions, maybe billions preserved, all legally, all quietly, all without having to touch the principal. This is not just some fantasy movie. This game has been in play for decades, if not centuries. Families like the heirs to the Mars Candy Company, the Gettys, and the Pritzkers are leveraging these structures today. They are not gambling. They are playing a different game entirely. What's really fascinating is how flexible these trusts are. Families can split assets across multiple states, layer protections, and even create complex succession rules that dictate how the wealth flows. It's not just preservation, it's strategic engineering of family fortunes across centuries. And that's why dynasty trusts are the ultimate tool in the 1%'s playbook. They are not just hoarding wealth, they are controlling it, growing it, and insulating it from risk in ways most people can barely imagine. Here's a reality that most people miss. The 1% are not just richer than the rest of the 99%. They think differently about money. And dynasty trusts are the perfect lens to see that. Most families plan year to year. They worry about taxes, credit, and short-term investments. The ultra-wealthy plan across centuries. They think in decades, generations, and in centuries. They are engineering systems that survive wars, recessions, divorces, lawsuits, and the unpredictable turns of history. Take the trusts that we've discussed so far. South Dakota, Nevada, Alaska, Delaware, Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire. These are not just tools for quick gains. They are frameworks designed to make wealth impervious, to outlast markets, governments, and even family disagreements. And the provocative part is that most people don't even know these tools exist. While the average family is paying estate taxes, losing wealth to creditors, or watching savings erode over generations, the 1% are quietly preserving billions. They understand a few key principles that keep their fortunes intact. They understand that time is the greatest ally. Wealth compounds over decades, not months. They understand that structure matters more than size. Even relatively small fortunes can grow into dynasties with the right legal architecture. They understand risk is managed, not eliminated. Lawsuits and divorces and economic downturns are anticipated and mitigated through trust. And they do understand privacy is power. Secrecy allows them to operate without interference, scrutiny, or social pressure. Think of it like this. Most people are navigating the financial world as if it's a single game of Monopoly. The 1% are designing the board itself, reshaping the rules, controlling the dice, and setting up generations of play. And that's exactly what dynasty trusts allow. A level of control and foresight that's almost unimaginable unless you've been inside the system. Families like the Mars heirs, the Whartons, the Pritzkers, the Gettys, they're all playing this game. And by the time most Americans even learn about it, they are already several moves ahead. So let's take a moment to step back and look at what we've covered so far. We started with a simple question. How do America's wealthiest families protect and preserve their fortunes across generations? And what we discovered is astonishing. The game is not offshore banking or flashy investment schemes. It's domestic dynasty trusts, carefully engineered in 7 states that quietly became the backbone of generational wealth. We saw South Dakota to be the audacious pioneer. Nevada and Alaska are the strategic challengers. Delaware is the historic stronghold of old money. Then you have Wyoming and Tennessee and New Hampshire are the clever new entrants shaping the landscape for modern dynasties. Each state plays a role. Each law is designed with precision, and together they form a network that safeguards billions across generations. We broke down the mechanics. Trust that can last for centuries, shield assets from lawsuits and creditors, minimize taxes, and give families control that stretches beyond their own lifetimes. And we saw why the 1% think differently than the rest of us. They play a game most of us don't even know exists, planning not for the next year, but for the next 100 years. Understanding how these structures work is not just academic, it's a glimpse into a world of strategic foresight, wealth preservation, and legal engineering that most Americans would never see. And it begs a question: what can we learn from it? Not to copy, but to think bigger, plan smarter, and understand the rules of the financial game we all play. So, as we close this episode, remember this: the 1% are not just rich, they are architects of the future, designing systems that outlast time itself. And while most of us operate on short-term cycles, they are playing for centuries. Thanks for joining me on this journey into America's dynasty trust havens. If you enjoyed this, you would definitely love my newsletter, where every Saturday morning I break down the money games the 1% plays so the 99% can finally level up. The link is in the description. So do not forget to subscribe and hit the like button to help the channel grow. And most importantly, stay curious.